Alrighty, hello, and welcome to my channel. This channel is an educational channel, and we look into great theories, concepts, and discoveries that are vitally important, but uh, traditionally suppressed. Things that the powers that be are trying desperately to prevent you from learning about. And I'm not sure how to define the powers that be, but they may be more pervasive than you might think. They may be part of what you consider to be the alliance or the good guys. They seem to also be fairly interested in suppressing this stuff. But anyway, this is another one in our series of Bible decodes. This is number 434. And we focus mainly on um, contextualizing the Bible, putting it into its historical and linguistic contexts, um, kind of um, stripping away the kind of deferential veneer of the Bible, looking at it as a piece of literature, as a document, and not as the Word of God, because that is not a truther approach. This is attempting to be a truther approach. Um, just like any other document, it has to stand up to some type of scrutiny. And for whatever reason, the truther movement seems to be very slow um, and remiss in applying any type of scrutiny to the Bible, just kind of taking it as is, as these are the words of Jesus, and Jesus was real, and even though there's absolutely no evidence for it, um, I'm going to believe what this says. And that is a recipe for disaster. And that is a recipe that is in the oven right now, that is cooking and getting ready to um, give you a lot of heartburn, a lot of um, negative results because it is not true. We've examined this from a number of different angles, but most of them have been in the context of the Roman origins hypothesis. There are probably 10 to 12 authors out there who have, that I know of, that I've read, that have proffered the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is, that the New Testament was written by the Roman Caesars, not by the illiterate Aramaic speaking fishermen and publicans in Palestine who were apostles of Jesus. No, they didn't write the Greek New Testament. They were illiterate in their own language, much less Greek. But instead, it was written by the Romans, the Caesars, who were all fluent in Greek and who were all literate. And they were also fluent in in Latin, um, which comes into play as well at a certain point. But it was the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, late first century, um, who were originally military leaders who fought against the Jews in the War of the Jews, war between the Romans and the Jews from 66 to 73 AD. And they eventually became the new Flavian emperors. And they wrote the New Testament as a method or a psychological operation in order to tame or domesticate, prune, or otherwise mellow out the Jews. The Jews had been a big pain for the Romans to deal with, super high maintenance in a far-flung empire that was short on manpower. Um, the Jews were always revolting and insurrecting, and uprising, uh, frequent terrorist attacks amongst the Jews. They saw themselves as a separatist people. They were just very difficult to govern. Um, a lot of the other tribes and nations that the Romans had under their umbrella were much easier to assimilate. The Jews were the most difficult. And so um, the Jews were waiting on a Messiah from many of the Old Testament books, prophecies to that effect. This was a Messiah that was going to deliver the Jews from the Romans or whoever. And this was a military commander. So the Romans, under Emperor Vespasian and Emperor Titus, decided to write a fictional story about a Jewish Messiah named Jesus, who instead was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar and walking the extra mile, turning the other cheek. In other words, being very deferential to the Romans. Throughout the Gospels, there is no one instance of Jesus doing anything against the Romans. But he does plenty against the Jews, overturning the tables of the money changers, calling the Pharisees, uh, vipers, and um, castigating the Jews who were selling small animals outside the temple for the sacrifice or at the outskirts of the temple, uh, admonishing his Jewish disciples that they must abandon their families to follow him, and so on. And then, uh, as we move further along in the New Testament, because this was a long and possibly still continuing conspiracy. This lasted for many generations of Romans. It was passed down within the Flavian families, and it passed down into Emperor Trajan, Emperor Hadrian, Emperor Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, and to all the, once the um, Emperor Constantine comes along, a few hundred, in the early 4th century, it passes all to the popes as well, the bishops of Rome and then the popes, and passes all the way down through the Dark Ages, up until at least the beginning of the printing press, if not to today. Um, so there are many people out there um, who have these genetics, who know that the Romans are the true authors of the New Testament. One of those people may or may not be our current president and probably several of our past presidents. Um, doesn't mean that he's a bad person. It means that he knows that he's pandering to you, and when he gives lip service to Christianity, he knows he's lying. Um, and he needs to be confronted about that. That has, in the past, has shown that he um, that his people are hip to something. That has been the exact method for things like the thing you put in your arm, and the um, a few other uh, things that he had to be called out on before he came clean about. He wants you possibly to call him out on this. But until you do so, he's going to continue to pander to you. Um, so I'm just saying that the Romans have carried out this conspiracy through the generations up until today. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church has gone nowhere in the last, uh, you know, 1800 years or whatever. So that is still, part of where the conspiracy lies. But also the Jews were witnesses of this. And so this is also within especially the Pharisaic rabbinical tradition. Um, anyway, when the Romans wrote the New Testament, they employed many different influences that they put into it because it has to look like a religion. It has to be convincing as a religion. And the Romans had created a number of other religions. They had experience in this. Just at the same time, they created several other religions. And so they employed a lot of ancient Indian philosophy and religion and mythology, Chinese, Japanese, Persian, Egyptian, Jewish, Greek, and Roman influences, pagan influences. They're all in there, and all of them far precede the New Testament. There's nothing, not a thing in the New Testament that is original or unique. All of it is borrowed from much older sources. The only unique part is possibly some of the psychological operation, the jokes and the satires and the ridicule and the derision, um, and maybe the pornography. This is all in there as well. It's just that you have to be able to kind of um, look at it for what it is. Sometimes maybe decode it, but oftentimes you just need to look at it for what it is. You give it a free pass because it's the Word of God. Anyway, we are reading from a book from Kersey Graves. It's called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christ. And this looks at uh, these various influences that were used by the Romans, even though Graves doesn't know that it's the Romans, but he does know that whoever wrote the New Testament was using all of these far flung uh, influences to compose the narrative there. And I think he's trying to enumerate a list here of moral and religious errors of Jesus. These are things that generally Jesus gets a pass for, but Graves is going to come down on him, I think, here. We'll see what happens. I frequently look at this through this lens that, uh, you know, if anybody other than Jesus did this, this would be heavily scrutinized. But because it's Jesus, it just gets, you know, uh, ignored. Okay, number one, the first moral precept in the teachings of Christ, which we will bring to notice, is one of a numerous class, which may very properly be arranged under the head of moral extremism. We find many of his admonitions of this character Nearly everything that is said is oversaid, carried to extremes, thus constituting an overwrought, extravagant system of morality, impracticable in its requisitions, as, for example, take no thought for the morrow, as in Matthew 5. If the spirit of this injunction were carried out in practical life, there would be no grain sown and no seed planted in spring, no reaping done in harvest, no crop garnered in autumn, and the result would be universal starvation in less than 12 months. But fortunately for society, the Christian world have laid this positive injunction upon the table under the rule of indefinite postponement. Number two, Christ's assumed to be most important requisition is found in the injunction, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all else shall be added unto you, as in Matthew 6:33. His early followers understood by this injunction, and doubtless understood it correctly, that they were to spend their lives in religious devotion and neglect the practical duties of life, leaving providence to take care of their families, a course of life which reduced many of them to the point of starvation. But moreover, it reduced their families to the point of starvation because Jesus told them that they had to abandon their families to follow him. And several of his disciples did just that. So we're talking about orphans and widows, basically uh, created because of Jesus. This is never looked at, especially by the Christians who are always promoting family values. Well, what kind of family values are those? You have to abandon your families. Let the dead bury their dead. You know, you don't have time to bury your father. You got to come with me instead. But nobody ever talks about that. Okay, number three, the disciple of Christ is required when smitten on one cheek to turn the other also. That is, when one cheek is pummeled into a jelly by some miscreant, some vile miscreant or drunken wretch, turn the other to be smashed up in like manner. This is an extravagant requisition which none of his modern disciples even attempt to observe. And again, this is, you hear these Christians, even these Christian truthers, called Jesus a disruptor, and Jesus is uh, a rebel. Uh, Not according to the text. Uh, he's more of uh, you know, a disruptor of Jews, but a complete cuck to the Romans. Um, Only exceeded by Paul. Number four, resist not evil, Matthew 5:34. Breathes forth a kindred spirit. This injunction requires you to stand with your hands in your pocket while being maltreated so cruelly and unmercifully that the forfeiture of your life may be the consequence. At least Christ's early followers so understood it. Number five, the disciple of Christ is required, when his cloak is formally wrested from him, to give up his coat also, as in Matthew 5, which seems to be quite the offending chapter. Um, and to carry out the principle, if the marauder demands it, he must next give up his boots, then his shirt, and thus strip himself of all his garments and go naked. This looks like an invitation and bribe to robbery. Number six, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth. And that's in Matthew 6:19. This is another positive command of Christ, which the modern Christian world, by common consent, have laid on the table under the rule of indefinite postponement, under the conviction that the wants of their families and the exigencies of sickness and old age cannot be served if they should live up to such an injunction. Number 7, sell all that thou hast and come and follow me. Is another command which bespeaks more piety than wisdom, as all who have attempted to comply with it have reduced their families to beggary and want. Which is even more astounding that Christians tout family values, because Jesus was just the opposite. Number 8, if any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Then he must hate it, as there are but the two principles, and from hate proceed envy, strife, evil, surmisings, and persecution. Evidently, the remedy in this case for worldly mindedness is worse than the disease. Number 9, he that cometh to me and hateth not father, mother, brother, sister, etc., cannot be my disciple. Now, we're talking about family values. Hateth not father, mother, brother, sister. That's in Luke 14:26. This breathes forth the same spirit as the last text quoted above. Many learned expositions have been penned by Christian writers to make it appear that hate in this case does not mean hate, but certainly it would be a slander upon infinite wisdom to leave it to be inferred that he could not say or inspire his disciples to say exactly what he meant, and to say it so plainly as to leave no possibility of being misunderstood or leave any ground for dispute about the meaning. What I would say is that, yeah, well, maybe you can construct it in a way to justify what he says. But would you do that if it were just a normal text? If it were something that you encountered in the 20th or 21st century, you would uh, read it as is. You would, um, be very discerning, critical, of and interpret it thusly. But because it's in the Bible and because it's about Jesus, you somehow give it a free pass and just overlook all of these things. That is what I see as the biggest problem. That you can't um, look at these things with some type of objectivity, and that you're going to bend over backwards to give it to rationalize some type of justification for this kind of talk and these kind of uh, comments. Number 10, rejoice and be exceeding glad when persecuted, as in Matthew 5:4. Now, as a state of rejoicing is the highest condition of happiness that can be realized, such advice must naturally prompt the religious zealot to court persecution in order to obtain complete happiness, and consequently to pursue a daredevil life to provoke persecution. And certainly that happened throughout history. Many Christians actually attempted to bring persecution upon themselves. And in the modern world, Christians imagine a level of persecution upon themselves, and they use it as some type of motivation and some type of validation that I wouldn't be persecuted unless I was right. And that is not right. What it generally means if you are uh, claiming persecution is that you would persecute somebody uh, if you were in power, but you're not. And that is what is the big concern for me as far as this um, golden age or Flavian age, which is what Flavian means, um, that we're looking at with the defeat of the globalists, is that the Christians are going to come right in and the witch burnings are going to start. Uh, it probably will take a little while, but that's what we're looking at. Unless the whole thing is tempered and the whole thing is exposed for what it is, because the Christians apparently aren't going to do it themselves. They're going to have it shoved down their throat that this is not true, um, because they're not going to do the research on their own. They're going to just continue to look at their book as if it is the Word of God. And that is not going to do, not for the golden age or the uh, age of Aquarius or the 5D consciousness. Um, we are going to be called on to um, be responsible for our own religion personally. That's why I tout the idea of deism, the belief in one God who is good, and that God has given humans the abilities, mental, spiritual abilities, reason, aesthetics, intuition, inspiration, justice, conscience, uh, the ability to behold God's creation and to understand God thereby directly. No need for intermediaries between us and God. No need for books. No need for priests, pastors, rabbis, popes, imams, ayatollahs, or any type of monks or any of that. We are able to do this directly, and it is our responsibility to do so here in this new age. And so, you know, um, I don't know if that means that all the books need to be, set aside, but they need to be definitely de emphasized. And given that they are psychological operations, certainly the New Testament and the Quran are psychological operations. The Old Testament is really a book of history and not religion. The God of the Old Testament is phased out in Genesis 1. Um, that's the only appearance of God in the in the Old Testament. The rest of it is all about Yahweh Elohim, who is not God, but some very flawed individual who has a lot more power and technological advancement than we do, but is an extremely flawed individual with just about every personality disorder in the book. But much of the history that is given in the Old Testament, I believe, is accurate, or at least, you know, fairly accurate. Okay, moving along to the next flawed statement of Jesus. Number 11, whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, which is in Luke 17:33. Here is displayed the spirit of martyrdom, which has made millions reckless of life and goaded on the frenzied bigot to seek the fiery faggot and the halter. We regard it as another display of religious fanaticism, indeed. I generally just call it martyrdom dum. Number 12, ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. And this is really religious fanaticism. All religions do this. They think that they're some type of special group of people because of how other people hate them. You know, definitely believe a lot of people hate Christians. Um, and it's because they're so overbearing and like so naive, and so sure of themselves when they haven't even read their own book. It's like, I know 1,000 times more about Christianity than your average Christian does. And I've never ever been a Christian. um, they're not even curious what's in the book, but they still will, go to bat for Christianity because it's in their emotions. They learned it growing up. But this is this type of a doctrine is also heavily used by the Jews and probably quite a few other religions as well. This is Matthew 10:12. You shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. How repulsive must have been their doctrines or their conduct. No sensible religion could excite the universal hatred of mankind. Oh, that's what I was going to say. This is, this is Satanism right here. You know, that this is why Satanism exists, is because they hate Christians. Most people who even entertain any ideas about Satanism do it because they hate Christians. By the way, Satan was also created by the Romans and does not exist. Satan never existed in the Old Testament of the Bible. There is no Satan. The word is used a handful of times in the Old Testament, and each time it refers to a human being who is an adversary or an obstacle, an impediment. But the all powerful type of supernatural Satan um, is a concoction of the Romans. And then an exaggeration, caricature of that has come down through the ages in a lot of artwork, and especially in Dante's um, Divine Comedy, Milton's Paradise Lost, and other books like that. And then especially in Hollywood. That is where we basically get our conception of Satan. Is not It's not a religious concept. It is a total superstition. That doesn't mean that there aren't Satanists. There are Satanists because they hate Christians, not because of any other reason. And if Christianity was wiped off the map, Satanism would be too. So Satanism needs to be looked at as like the evil twin of Christianity. You get rid of one and you'll get rid of the other. No sensible religion could excite the universal hatred of mankind, for it would contain something adapted to the moral, religious, or spiritual taste of some class or portion of society, and hence make it and its disciples loved instead of hated. And then, how could they be hated of all men when not one man in 1,000 ever heard of them? Here is more of the extravagance of religious enthusiasm. Okay, I think we're going to stop there after the first 12. And, you can kind of look at this as nitpicking, but it's nitpicking that needs to be done because nobody's doing it. Everybody just gives this stuff a free pass. And so maybe if you nitpick, you might be overcompensating a little bit, but it's better than absolutely nothing. So we're going to stop right there. Like, share, subscribe, comment, contribute, and come back next time for the tomorrow's Bible Decode. We will continue with this nitpicking of the words of Jesus, and uh, you know, this is what your priest or pastor should have been doing all along. He has never done. This is what your Christian friends and family should have been doing all along that they have never done. So hopefully you will have the ears open to hear this, as opposed to, calling me of Satan, or, one of your other lazy excuses that you Christians are always giving for justifying your beliefs that are, you know, really quite immature and really um, obsolete. It's over for you guys. You're going to need to move into the golden age and take responsibility for your own beliefs instead of hiding behind all of these, um, ghastly belief systems that you have. All right, thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.